Hello, this is Kara from Kara Tarot. Today I'm answering a hashtag My Gratitude Decks with questions developed by @Moonflower Moments. This is a 12 question hashtag and some very, to me, rather deep and emotional questions. And I think she would agree with that because at least for the first 4 questions, she said, they won't all be this heavy, honestly. and they are pretty heavy. And the questions certainly took me to some very heavy places. I will say a proviso that given the trajectory of my work with the cards, having started at a very young age with the Rider-Waite-Smith deck, and then continuing most of my life with only the Rider-Waite-Smith deck, and then even when I got to other decks, the other 2 decks sat for many years for different reasons. This remained the ingrained image in my mind of what the tarot cards are. And so really, I could go through these questions one way, and the answer for every single question would be this. For the most part, though, I would say the answer to every question is simply not a tarot deck for me. And I'll get into more of that later, but we all definitely use our cards in different ways and have different connections to them. I'm grateful for this hashtag that it's sort of opens a window on a way that other people connect to their cards that I really don't. And I don't know that I feel that need, but it's always an interesting thing to know that. And the other answer, as you will see, for those of you who've watched my channel a lot, you're going to be thinking, oh, it's the same old decks, because the reason is my favorite decks that I've told you are my favorite decks are my favorite decks because they're the ones that I have connected to in some of these deeper ways, or that have triggered other connections. So this is the giant Rider-Waite-Smith deck, which after, this is my second take on starting this. I was interrupted by my mother ringing her bell for some help, and but also I had started rambling a bit too much too early on. So suffice it to say, my first deck I got in elementary school, it was Rider-Waite-Smith. In my teens, when I was re-energized to get more connected to the decks, because my then sister-in-law was interested in the decks, I was in my teens. She was a very manipulative person who used the cards to gain control of people and manipulate them. And so I had kind of a really negative experience at that time with the cards. Despite, every time you pick them up again, you increase your learning curve. And then I had a deck that I know I moved a lot, and a lot of it was for my acting career, but it's just once I left home, I moved around a lot. And I know I carried a deck around with me wrapped in purple velvet for 30 years, 40 years. It wasn't a large part of my life once I began pursuing professional acting, because I was working so much and, had a day job. I'd go directly from my day job to rehearsals or performances. I was doing 6 or 7 stage plays a year, which, these are full runs, 6-week runs. So you can kind of time that out between rehearsals and that. I had very little time off. And at that point, that really was a strong focus of my life. trying, always thinking about what the next job is going to be. And so, and then I guess being generous, it was about 5 years ago that I decided I'm going to take this seriously now. I'm going to go back to square one, and maybe six. I've been caregiving for my mother for 6 years now, so I'm going to go back to square one, really take this seriously, really do a serious study on this, and so that's what happened. And then, but still, this was my deck until I think about 3 years ago, when I, because I'd had other YouTube channels. About 3 years ago, I began a TarotTube channel, or I started watching TarotTube and found, this whole new world of decks. And then I think it was 2 years ago now, I started my TarotTube channel. So really, between this and my very favorite decks, if you watch me regularly, you'll know. Oh, there she is. That's me. I used to think the Queen of Cups was my significator, but I have come to realize it's probably the Queen of Wands. I love the Lady Lorelei says the Queen of Wands is a really good friend, really creative. You really want to know her, but you wouldn't want to be her. And I thought, well, that's me. Or it has been. So now, rather than just rambling on as to why I wasn't going to do this, I'll partake into some of that when I go through the questions. The deck that has stood by my side in the darkest moments, no, I don't have one. I wasn't, in my darkest moments of my life, I was never working with tarot. And I hope that remains true in the future, too, because I'm working with tarot now, so I hope that means I won't have any more dark moments, or at least not the darkest. Number two, the deck that told me the hardest truths. I have two for this, so even though a lot of my answers will be not applicable, I do have a couple decks for this one. The Antique Anatomy Tarot. I have found this to be one of the harshest decks that I have. I had trouble with it initially because it seemed too much like forensic, more autopsy imagery for me, and I had trouble with that for a while. And then I watched the partial series by Abundant Life Tarot about this deck, and by sharing the way she works with the deck, it really helped open it up for me. It definitely is much more about color, and so I actually enjoy reading with it now. So I got over the creepies with it, but that has nothing to do with the fact that this tells harsh truths. This is a very serious deck for me. This is a deck that it doesn't play, it doesn't fool around. It's a very serious deck. It deals with things seriously. And that goes above and beyond the imagery. It's not even about the imagery. It's that it's just the tone of this deck is just serious. Even using flowers and color, it has a very serious leaning. And then the other deck might surprise you, the Mystical Medlies Tarot. Even though I have sung the praises of this regularly, even though it's cartoon imagery, any of you who knows these old cartoons knows they had a very dark side. And that's what's wonderful about this deck. It makes it a great deck to take out to parties or to fairs or something, because while it has these engaging and fun classic cartoon imagery, at the same time, it's a tough cookie, and it's going to read you about your friends, for example. It's it just has, and to me that makes it a deck that has everything you want in a deck, is that it has that full range of shades of meaning, light and dark, and it's a really strong reader for me. I have to say for me, because I don't think there's any one deck that's necessarily a fantastic reader for everyone. It has to do, I think it has to do with you, and as you connect with the deck and the imagery in the deck. At least that's my opinion. Number 3, the deck that gave me language for my feelings. Not applicable for me. I read books. I began doing theater camps and workshops in my teens. So between reading and writing and performing, that's what gave me the language for my feelings. And then also in my teens is when my parents first began sending me to psychologists, thinking that I needed to be fixed. And time after time, the psychologist would tell me that I was one of the most emotionally stable people that they'd ever met, and that my parents were the issue. And then I'd get yanked away from that person and taken to someone else, and who would say the same thing. And eventually there was enough of a history there that they knew that if they told my parents that I wouldn't be continuing to see them. So a couple of the last people I saw, even point blank told me that. They said, this isn't what I'm saying to your parents, because the moment I tell them what's really going on here, they won't want to hear it, and that will be the end. So they kind of left it with me as to whether it was useful to me to keep seeing them, and it was, because, when you're in your teens, there's a lot to explore, especially when you're dealing with parents who are a variety of extremely controlling, extremely critical, narcissistic, abusive, all of those things. So, and in varying degrees and in a fluctuating way. And then the kind of game that went on of, because my father was very volatile, the game was that my father was always the problem, but that wasn't true. There was an interplay going on there between them, and both of them played their part in making all of us tremendously withdrawn and insecure. So that's what gave me the language for my feelings. Although I would say art, overall, I would just say art, because I also was a painter. I was just taking art lessons and playing music, and so we had a very strong arts education, because that was my mother's professional background. So the arts were highly valued. Not only my mother's, but my mother and her sister, my aunt, and my aunt's husband were all professional musicians. And so the arts was very important in our family, all kinds of arts. And that really gave me the language for my feelings. Number 4, what opened my eyes to what I could be. Now, again, I would say it was the theater that really opened my eyes to what I could be, because, different people go into theater for different reasons. Some people go in to express themselves, and I went in to not be myself. And so my whole slant of going into acting was as a character actress. And I'm showing you the distant past tarot right now, and I will speak to this in a moment. So anyway, being a character actress really opened the doors on what I could be, because, and it's why I loved acting, because I could use everything in me to try to realistically portray the life of someone incredibly different from me. And so through that, you get to explore all the different varieties of yourself that you could be, and might never want to be, and do things that you would never do because it's true for the character, but it's not true to who you are. I actually had a guy who dated me, or began dating me, very quickly said, "You are nothing like you were on stage." And he spewed that at me because he wasn't happy about that. And I said, "No, I was acting. That's my job. I'm an actress." And he liked what he saw on stage and not so much me. So the Distant Past Tarot I chose for this because I've often said that I don't really feel the need to create a deck, because if I were to create a deck, I think it would look like this. And so this was the deck that I really finally landed on, and I said, this is my deck. This is the deck that I would create. This includes all of my weird interest in the 1700s that I've had since I was a very young child. Very, very young. I think at the age of 5, I chose a cameo brooch to give to my father's mother, my grandmother, for her birthday, which she treasured to the point of asking to have it put on her in her casket when she was buried. I kept begging my great aunt for a porcelain figurine that she had of a woman dressed in the clothing from the period of the 1700s. So I always had this affinity for what is predominantly this time period, the 1700s. And so in that respect, this deck reflects what I could be. Number 5, the deck that dared me to live. Absolutely not applicable. Without getting too heavy, at least from my teens onward, I always looked on suicide as a viable option. I would say the thing that dared me to live was having parents who always told me I couldn't do it, I wasn't good enough, that I wouldn't be loved, that no one would ever love me because I was too mouthy, that, oh, what if you fail? You don't want to try because you might fail. So, and on and on. And what you really need is to be knocked across the room a few times. The cacophony of messages that I withdrew from. There's a reason I was very withdrawn and assumed people wouldn't like me. So what dared me to live was proving them wrong. There was, and thank the Lord, there was something in me that made me say, you're wrong, and I'm going to prove you're wrong. And they weren't wrong about everything, but they were wrong about a lot of those things. But it was interesting because then later in my theatrical life, I came across a man whose parents were very similar, but his way of responding to it was incredibly different, in that he would kind of take in, internalize, oh, you think I'm a failure? I'll show you how bad a failure I can be. Now, maybe that's an intrinsically male thing. I don't know. But he would then wreck whatever he was working on and do it spectacularly. For example, he was in a play, and his parents were supposed to come one night and said something awful to him before the show. So his parents came to the show and he didn't. And it was only like the second night of the run. And so the play was canceled that night because no one knew where he was. And he would self-sabotage like that perpetually and in many, many aspects of his life. And so, it's only the grace of God that my response to these things was, I'll prove you wrong. And, thank goodness. So that's what dared me to live. Number 6, celebrated my biggest victories. Again, I don't have a tarot deck for that. I wasn't into tarot when I had what I would look back on as my biggest victories. And one of the things about being in theater and in the arts is by the time you get to the point of having a victory, you're already beginning another project. So that, you can have marvelous reviews, which I was considered a darling of the critics. You can have marvelous reviews, and that's great, but you still have to maintain the run on your own. Those reviews don't maintain the run for you. So you have the work to do. And meanwhile, you're already auditioning for the next job. So I don't know that I ever had a time where I had these big celebratory victories. I remember one time when I got a commercial in Los Angeles, and I happened to be sick at home that day in bed with the flu, and somebody came over to tell me that she'd taken the call, and she said, well, why aren't you excited? And I was like, number one, I had the flu. But number two, when you're a professional actor, it's kind of like a relief to hear the yes, but then there's always the immediate, now I have to do the work. So there aren't these moments of great celebration because there's another work. There's the win means now you have to do something more. It's kind of like, I guess, for regular people, it would be, you're applying for jobs, you finally get a job, and yeah, it's great that you're getting the job, but you still don't get a paycheck for 2 weeks. You've got to get back and forth to work, and now you have to learn all the duties associated with that job. So anyway, celebrating big wins was, and again, this wasn't part of what I was taught. It wasn't modeled for me. So celebrating victories, because it's kind of, I guess that's the British strain of our blood, which would be, you don't talk about your victories because then other people might want to knock you down, or I don't know. I can't address that, but it wasn't part of my life. Number 7, the deck that taught me the importance of stillness. Again, I would say it wasn't a deck that taught me the importance of stillness. It was my theater training. But the deck that has utilized that and that I value is the Dream Dust Shamanic Tarot. I've mentioned it many times before. It is highly abstract. And so, at least in terms of my reading, it came at a time when I was ready and looking for something that was going to make me stop and look deeper. And it's been wonderful for that. This is one of the 2 decks that I keep by my bed. And even now, suddenly I'm quiet. It calms me. Which is interesting because I really don't care for abstract art. I've said before, my uncle lived with it. He had it all over his house. I don't, it's not something I would choose to live with, but I do I enjoy it for this, for meditation. It's just wonderful. I believe some people use the Margaret Peterson deck in a similar way. There are a couple other decks that kind of fulfill this purpose. And I think I knew about those decks when I chose this one. This one, in many ways, seemed to be the most abstract, and it's why I chose it. I knew it would require the deepest letting go for me. Number 8, the deck that gives me more questions and answers. I really didn't know how to answer, what to make of this. I'm inclined to say that if a deck really leaves me with more questions than answered, it's a deck I'm not interested in. But I can see one aspect of that with, this is the Gustave Doré Great Bible Tarot. And I've said many, many times, you really need the companion book. Don't get this version. If you want the Art of Doré, there are other decks that are more accessible. With this one was specifically made to be a bibliomancy. So every verse is, every card is paired with a Bible verse. And in very thoughtfully putting together the Bible stories with the cards. And I guess it's not so much that I feel like this deck leaves me with more questions, but it definitely leaves me with more to do. I have used these cards just like a normal Rider-Waite-Smith and just read the number and the suit, or read what major it is, and done a cursory reading. But if you're using this deck as it was designed, you go back to the book, you read the Bible verse, you think about those things, that story and relationship to the card. So in that respect, it supplied more questions, it supplied more work, and it also became part of my continuing work exploring my faith within the structure of tarot. Number 9, the deck that taught me to notice magic in the mundane. I think that could be, not only could it be, as I said, the answer to every one of these questions is the Rider-Waite-Smith, because there's something very magical and very theatrical about the Rider-Waite-Smith, but also many other decks. But the deck that I chose for this is the Tildwick Tarot. Because these are just rooms. And I think at another point in my life, I would have looked at these and thought these rooms look dirty, and that would have turned me off. But being able to enter that, in that case, it's like the outdoor garden area at the side of the house, to really go to that place, to the attic where the trunks are, to looking closely at a painting on the wall of the house. And so then you do find magic in the mundane in this deck, really appreciating the wrought iron doors and the unevenness of the bricks. This is the other deck I keep by my bed. And I think that becomes becomes sort of a gratitude practice as well. Number 10, the deck that encourages me to embrace levity. Well, there can only be one answer for this, and that is the Wonderland Tarot. This deck, even in my first deck interview, I did my deck interview for this deck and the next deck at the same time, and they both spoke to me so strongly. They have remained in my top 5. The Wonderland deck, for one thing, there are 2 cards, 2 identifier cards in this deck. Of course, it's not showing up now. And one of them is normal, and one of them is a mirror image. There it is. And I left that in the deck by mistake. I took the mirror image one out. Yeah. And so we'll get back to mirror images. And when I did my first deck interview reading with this deck, the last card, the final card, was this card, this deck card. And I just really, and now this is after the reading that I had done with it was just made me laugh out loud. I've never had a reading that made me laugh out loud the way this deck did. And some of it's because the answers were so sarcastic and they were so clearly the opposite of what they should have been. And it literally made me laugh out loud. And this card was the final card in the deck interview. And I just felt as if it was the final from this deck. This is who I am. This is the way I'm going to be. The fact that that showed up as the final card. So I keep this in the deck now. And this deck continues to do wacky things from time to time. This deck has given me readings that are completely backwards readings. Like every card is the opposite of what the answer of the reading would be. You know, it's like I've read the reading as it was written, as the cards were laid out. It made no sense at all. And then I thought, wait a minute, this is a mirror deck. And so I read every card as if it were reversed from the meaning, the opposite meaning of what that card said, and it made total sense. So it just reminds me to look at things in different ways and to laugh. And it's wonderful in that regard. It is Wonderland. And number 11, which deck shifted my practice? And I would say that this then, you know, after years and years of using the RWS, the influence of the angel shifted my practice because once again, it incorporated, I mean, I never thought I liked angel decks. I always thought they were icky and sticky and too sweet. This is, as others have said, this is the angel deck for people that don't like angel decks. I know many of these works of classical art before I reached this deck. I rave about this deck and many times, although I had stopped featuring it, so I can rave about it again. All of the court cards are portraits of particular people. And I'm still working on learning them. That's one of the depths of this deck, is knowing who that person is, what they did, and how it relates to this particular card. So all of the court cards are portraits. All of the majors, except for the sun, I think, all of the majors have a specific angel that is being referenced, and you need to learn all of the angels. Um, so there's just there's a lot to work with in this deck on a whole lot of levels. And this was the deck that I did my deck interview of both of these decks on the same night. They arrived together. This deck not only identified itself as the Chariot, which I took very positively in terms of it being protective of me, but as I was setting the rest of the cards aside to read the main cards, another card flipped out, which was the Hermit, and telling me that it saw me, that it knew who I was. For example, that's Machiavelli, that's Niccolo Machiavelli, and I have read several of his books, not just the one that he's known for, as well as a history, a biographical history of him. And he's a marvelous pick for the Knight of Swords. It has some of my most favorite images. That's one of them. These two people dancing down the road of life together. So the way that it shifted my practice is that, as I said, up until I got these might only have been like my 5th and 6th decks. I got these pretty early on, but they really shifted the way I thought about the way readings can be and the purpose of the cards. This deck also has an angel message, which is basically an affirmation with each deck. So this deck and the next deck became part of the beginning of my posting daily affirmations. So in that way, it also shifted my practice too. And finally, the deck that started a creative project. Now, I have to say, initially, I was going to say there's no deck that has done that for me, because my creative projects are performances driven, and I have a backlog of performance project ideas. But this is the Dolly Tarot, and the project that it did jumpstart was, again, that posting of daily affirmations. And because of the fantastic book that goes with this deck by Johannes Fiubig, for every card he has a practical advice. And it isn't really an affirmation, it's practical advice. It's like, sometimes very mundane, but other times, very deep. They are definitely connected to each card. So not only did it have this marvelous blending of known imagery and then Dolly's surreal imagery and the traditional card meanings, it had this marvelous writing along with it. So I have regularly said, if the house were burning and I could only grab one deck, I'm pretty sure this is the one that I would grab. But I'd have to grab that big Hawken book too, so I don't know. So this is my answer. So that is the creative project, and it has become a creative project because then it blossomed into scripture cards, and which is definitely more of an in-depth study and work on my pursuit of mystical experiences that coordinate my Christianity with the use of tarot, and I think that the scripture card postings that I've done have shown that it is possible. And time, history alone should tell you that of course it's possible, because the Visconti Sforza decks, where all those people were all actively involved in one way or another within the church. So this theoretical division between the two is not an essential division. At one point, I'll talk more about that, I guess, if anybody's interested. So, thank you all for listening to my blather and some of these uncomfortably deep topics, I guess. I appreciate this tag, and thanks to Moonflower Moments for creating this tag. And I hope you've enjoyed, I guess, hearing a little bit more about me and my selections. I hope you have a lovely day. This is Kara from Kara Tarot. Thank you.